It looks like we are live enough. Um, I'll just wait for the other video to start and such. The video demonstrate that it's working and such. Video to start. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I didn't really want to do Huygens, but the last video, I mean, the 10 dislikes or whatever it was the last time I looked. From people who don't want to, make a counter argument. And, I've made a few double slit videos. And so I'll make if the appropriate response is, okay, I'll do it some more. Okay, I'll show physics professors and I'll show you exactly what they say. And then, how it doesn't make any sense. And then you can tell me how I'm wrong. But I mean, I just, can't argue with their own interpretations, their own statements. So now the argument is apparently that you can derive the correct waveform if you use a different math than the math that they use. Well, that's okay, you can say that, but I don't even know if that's true, because all I've seen when they derive Huygens is they eliminate all the little wavelets in the middle. So the whole idea of having this infinite thing is, in an infinite circumstance, you could never eliminate the one and the last. So the first and the last wavelet can't be eliminated because obviously it's an infinite regression. But all the ones in the middle can be eliminated because the angle theta is so tiny between them that they abolish each other. They're of no consequence. They're like as if the same photon. So the two little wavelets that are really tiny and right next to each other don't create any diverging wave, and therefore, diverging phase change. So there's a zero phase change, so they can't make a contribution to the output. And so then you're left with the two end photons, decided by the width of the slit, conveniently, and that's how they do the single slit math. So apparently if you derive the single slit math, you'll get the same result as just eliminate all the middle waves and just keep the two end ones. So anyway, so there's some argument about what quantum mechanics is, and I guess I want to get to part of that. This gets into the whole, because Huygens was into this whole refraction stuff too, and the whole, the Newton's preference for particles, light to be a particle, and frankly, the rational preference, in my opinion, because it doesn't even make sense as a wave. A wave implies an ether, and then you have to explain how the ether, how it doesn't spread in the ether, how you have a wave that doesn't spread under normal circumstances and apparently only spreads when it encounters an object and then interferes with itself, because it doesn't do it. If I drop a rock in a pool of water, there's no interference pattern. It's a fact. Okay, and in the single slit there is. So it's just kind of silly to say, to have this argument. All right, so let's go back to the history of this bullshit. So another fundamental part of this. Okay, so Newton's rings obviously goes all the way back to Newton. And Newton's rings is basically single slit, what was called single slit diffraction. But obviously it's not diffraction because it's an interference pattern. It's on, off, on, off, on, off. So it's exactly what you'd expect in the single slit experiment, in the sense that it's just a circular version of the single slit. That's all Newton's rings are. So you have Newton's rings, and then 100 years later, whatever it is, 18 whatever, 02 or something, Young comes along with his whatever, the experiment that can't really be reperformed his way because he didn't really detail very well even how he did it. But regardless, they can come up with approximations, but it's done with sunlight and blah, blah, crude experiment. And all of a sudden, as all the physics professors will say, Young's experiment proves light's a wave. All right, so here you have exactly the same pattern, except for the strength of the central maxima. So obviously in the single slit, the central maxima is strong because there's no impediment in the middle. I mean, duh, there's nothing blocking the middle light, so you would expect the middle to be very bright, yes. And the double slit. So that's the only difference essentially between the patterns. The patterns are both wavelength dependent, that is the spacing between the bars will depend on the wavelength of the light, and the projection of the image of the bars obviously is dependent on the distance from the slits, and obviously is dependent on how wide the slits are. So the more narrow the slits are, the more spread out the pattern is, and the weaker it is, obviously, because there's less photons. So those are the kind of experiments that really should be probably done with photographic film, something that can be done over time so you can get a full good resolution of the image, because this idea of an instantaneous image, like shining a laser, really does destroy all of the existing but weaker component. All right, so next. So then the young guy does the experiment, and all of a sudden this is proof, absolute proof, that photons are a wave, and yet somehow it wasn't proof in the single slit. So that's your first, in my opinion, the first thing that you just say, this doesn't make any sense. Newton's rings existed 100 years before, more than 100. They already knew of the phenomenon of light bending when you have a narrow opening. I mean, in the sense that the light does this interference pattern, on, off, on, off. And yet somehow it's a big surprise that when you have two openings, okay, you also get an on-off pattern that's, and actually an on-off pattern that has the two patterns built into it. So I'll read one of the comments, because one of the commenters point that out. So, yeah, no, I just don't know if I want to do the picture drawing thing in this video. It's just not convenient, camera-wise. I have to draw it and hold the picture up, and can't see it very well, and so I don't know if there's any point. But, the key to Huygens in the single slit, you can see it in their math. I'm just saying, you can see where the Huygens is injected, and that there's a number 2 put in the equation to make it so there's a second photon. But the idea is here's the single slit, and what Huygens basically does is says, okay, there's an infinite number of little waves. So let's just say first, the very idea that there's an infinite number is silly. The idea that there's absolutely no proof whatsoever that a wave, as it's moving, is sending a wave ahead of it to create the next wave. So that essentially the wave doesn't just move like a wave, that essentially what it's doing is it's making little waves and then jumps to the next wave position, and then makes little waves and then jumps to the next wave position. We know that isn't what's happening, so why are we pretending that's what's happening? It's not what's happening. There's no physical evidence that anything like that is happening. So anyway, the idea is that there's an infinite number of these little tiny waves, and that this somehow is the truth or has something to do with physics or reality, when it's just crap. But anyway, so it's crap on just the surface. There's no evidence that there's any, that because a wave goes through an opening, or a wave is in a pond of water, that it's creating a bunch of little waves ahead of it. that are apparently capable of going faster than the wave itself. and that's creating the next wavefront. There's just no evidence that that's how waves move. And there's all kinds of evidence, slow motion photography, whatever you want to call it, but that's not how it happens. Okay, the wave does actually move. It doesn't jump through a Huygens mechanism. Anyway, so in the single slit, what Huygens is saying basically is, okay, there's an infinite number of little waves in here. And the point is they're all so close to each other, all in here, that they annihilate each other in terms of these are all irrelevant. And the only ones they keep are this one and this one over here. So they just turned one wave, one photon comes in, and two photons come out. So they're just creating two new waves, two new sources from one source. So one photon goes in, two photons leave, okay, and that's Huygens. That's what it does in the single slit for the math. The math wouldn't work if they didn't create a second source. So it gives them the second source. My argument is if you do that in the two slit experiment, quite obviously, if you Huygens them individually, you'll end up with math for 4 openings, 4 slits, because the math is based on 1 and 1, 2 photons being created by 1 photon coming in. So there's two openings, 1 photon comes in, 2 photons go out, and that's what the math is doing. Now if they Huygens this, okay, there's no way they can do just the 2 interference patterns. They're going to get 4 interference patterns. So that's what I call bogus. But the argument is too is that their math, as I've shown in videos, okay, their math doesn't describe the actual experiment. So the actual experiment does have 2 patterns. Okay, so but it's not, the pattern isn't consistent with the pattern you'd get if you had 4 openings. It's nowhere near the pattern you get with 4 openings. So it's obviously some other pattern. So you could argue that because their math is inaccurate anyway, they should get rid of it. And they probably should only do these derivations. But essentially, again, I'm saying that if you do that, so you do 2 separate single slit derivations, and then just account for this distance between them, the single impediment. So then you do a third, you derivate these 2, and then you derivate the combination of these 2. But I don't know if that's going to get you the right, he claims it works. So I'm saying, I don't know. I haven't seen somebody to do it that way. So how can I know if that works? But obviously the real pattern is 2 patterns. There's a pattern, and then there's bars inside the pattern. All right. But again, on its face, I'm just saying on its face, you have Newton's rings, which are the single slit experiment, just round. And then it was supposed to have been some sort of brilliant new observation that Newton's rings essentially happens with 2 apertures also. Now, that wouldn't be a huge surprise to anybody who knew what Newton's rings were, right? So if Young was aware of Newton's rings, why would Young think he had discovered something? It's not much of a discovery, right? I mean, the fact that you make slits instead of having a round opening just means that instead of the pattern going in 4 directions or 2 directions, well, 4 directions, it'll only go in the 1 direction, because you've sort of forced there's no interference happening up and down because you've lengthened the opening. So you've gotten rid of the top part of the ring and the bottom part of the ring, and you're just keeping the side parts of the ring. But it's just Newton's rings. It's not doing anything else but Newton's rings. So why wasn't Newton's rings, at the time of Newton's rings, decisive proof that light is a wave? Okay. Let's see, what else do I need to say? Yeah, there's just so much to get into with this stuff, because these, like I say, I could play the videos, but I just don't, maybe I'll put a string of them together or take a bunch of clips out of them. I mean, I've already done that to some extent. I mean, I played the Walter Lewin clip where he's reading the commentary on Huygens, you know, where the other physicist says, the guy who writes textbooks says, look, we shouldn't be using this thing because it's getting the right answer for the wrong reason. Huygens has no theoretical foundation. It doesn't have any justification as a theory or a principle. And I don't know whether he points out the whole infinite dilemma, but it's just kind of silly for a physicist to talk about an infinite number of anything inside of something, you know, inside a container. So, I mean, it's, and he just, you know, basically sloughs it off like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to get the right answer for the wrong reason, and that's okay. And somehow that's what good physics is. And that goes back to the Feynman thing, you know, don't bother trying to understand it. Don't bother trying to make it be reasonable or sensible or rational. Just do the fucking math. And that's kind of just a silly way for physicists, the people who are supposed to be looking for the truth. I mean, that's like me saying God must be God because people who believe in God commit less crime. So it obviously works, right? God is proven, okay, because people who believe in God are less likely to be homicidal maniacs or some kind of bullshit. So that's proof of God. And so we all should accept the existence of God because it's been proven, because God works, because God makes people into nicer people. And that's, you know, that's a fallacy, okay, a logical fallacy. It's crap. And it certainly isn't the kind of crap that you expect from physicists. And especially now with these, like I said, 10 down ratings for a video, making my argument and not getting a counter argument. No one's shown me the video demonstrating how I'm wrong. You all just sound like Borg. It's like we're the Borg. You're doing anti-Borg. We're opposed to you. You're anti-Borg. You're not doing science. You don't have any. You don't give a shit about the truth, and you don't care that you're getting maybe the right answers for the wrong reasons. You think that's okay. Getting the right answers is okay as long, and it doesn't matter if you're doing it wrong. It doesn't matter if your premises are wrong, and that those wrong premises will be the foundation for thinking on other subjects where you won't get the right answer. And I'll argue that the whole reason space got bent and time got warped and all this shit happened was because of wrong premises. And those wrong premises can get you into big fucking trouble. Like the premise that light bends without having to hit an electron. There's absolutely no evidence that light ever does any of that. That the only time light ever changes its direction is it has to interact with an electron or an atom. But I mean, I think it's the electrons, but regardless, and that's what happens. So again, I watched a little bit of a Lewin video today, and like I said, there was little sentences here and there. I mean, I don't want to have to play the whole thing, but I mean, I have to take the segments out that are relevant. But he was talking about refractive indexes, and then he was saying that stuff like, well, because Huygens and Newton were arguing about why light diffracts, the diffraction angle into when there's a surface change, and that stuff has this reflective index or diffractive index or reflective index, yeah. So there was this thing where like Newton was basically speculating that light speeds up when it goes into a denser material like water or glass, and by Huygens' theory, it would be that light slows down. So Huygens was right, but the physics professor is talking as if light really does slow down, which, again, I think most physicists, the good ones anyway, kind of know that light doesn't slow down. It travels a longer path. It goes into things, and things happen to the frequency that is light. The carrier is destroyed, and the frequency moves through the medium, so it takes it a longer time. But the idea that the force itself slowed down is just wrong. It moved differently because of the substance. And it wouldn't take much of a movement. So you can sort of understand if the straight line path is this, and I'm going to slow something down by 40%, I can just do it with a triangle. And this line will end up being 40% longer than this line. So you can sort of understand that the hypotenuse is the short one and the anything angular is longer. So all you need to do is reflect off electrons that are not in linear positions, and you do this Aliasing thing, and the Aliasing thing consumes 40% more distance. It doesn't take much of an angle to do that. All right, anyway. I mean, the percentages go up dramatically as you increase the angle of the deflection. And in the end, it's always the free electrons on the outside of the surface that are going to decide what gets emitted by, say, something that's transparent. But so that's another key thing that physics doesn't seem to understand, is the fact that that electrons don't really evacuate from any space unless they have a place to go. And they always have a place to go. There's always a place that has less charge density. So if an electron if you could actually stop one and actually just say stop, okay, complete absolute zero movement, it's basically going to sense, through the forces being emitted at it, which direction has less electrons. And that's the way it's going to end up moving. So whatever direction has less electrons, that's where it's going to start going. And that's how electrons work. And you can't suck them out with vacuums. You can't do any of that because they love it when you pull all the other crap out. They're saying, hey, this is really great in here. I'm not leaving. There's no electrons in here to bother me. I mean, you got rid of the atoms. You got rid of the other influences. So the electrons become very happy. The free electrons say, hey, I've never had it better than this. I can sort of almost relax in here in terms of spacing themselves. Well, anyway. But yeah, free electrons are a key concept in physics that's just totally ignored by physics. So, that's one of the arguments I want to get to. Let's see, yeah, off topic, but in Thunderfoot's latest video, him addressing here, he uses 3 or 4 clips of you and others. Yeah, I didn't know it was 3 or 4. I thought it was 2, but I didn't watch all of the clips because I was like saying, this is just gratuitous, right? I'm going to watch 8 minutes of silly clips by silly people. I mean, number one is like quote mining, right? Just, oh yeah, I'll just quote mine arguments from people and mock them this simple way because I'm a troll. And that's all Thunderfoot has become. He trolls people. So it's just, I'll make a video, just because, I should respond to it because it's just such a cheap maneuver, but it was always a cheap maneuver. I mean, he lost in debates with religious people, and the only way he wins is that it's like character assassination. He didn't defeat Venom Fang X with decisive arguments. He defeated him by outing him for all kinds of personal indiscretions, or whatever you want to call them, vices. Anyway. Huygens was a homosexual. Well, I don't know. Free Willy. No, we don't need any of this guy. Okay. Jew bellies. Yeah, that's just so. Wow. You're really dumb, right? Yeah. Yeah, really dumb. So, let's see. Where was I? Right. So I'll read this one guy's comment. I mean, it all gets kind of convoluted. And the trying to figure out what part of this is being argued. But I'd just say fundamentally, Huygens is nonsense as a principle. It's a contrivance. It doesn't have any relevance to anything that actually happens. Waves don't create wavelets. It's almost like imposing, it's almost like calling it a principle. It's almost like calling Copenhagen interpretation of the two-slit experiment a principle. I mean, that would sort of be a violation of reason there, because there's no evidence that happens. There's no evidence that Huygens happens. And it's just a toy, a thing to be manipulated to make what you want to have happen. Like I said, in the single slit, what they make happen is they turn one photon into two photons being emitted from the edges of the surfaces. So the two surfaces now create end photons, and those end photons are used in the math to create the sine thetas and the out of phase landing points on the screen. So, and it's simply, that's all it is. It's contrived to create a second photon because they need it to do the math. And if they're using Huygens, if somebody is using Huygens to derive the two-slit experiment, I'm sure they have some other mathematical mechanism in there, okay, to force it to eliminate the extra photons it makes. They get annihilated somewhere. Because if you do all four of them, it's obviously not going to get you the classic interference pattern spoken about. All right, so the other manipulation I'll just bring up, because it's like the Newton's rings thing. Why is Young's experiment at all meaningful when you already have Newton's rings? If something is supposed to be evidence, wouldn't the more spectacular event be the interference pattern being created by a single slit rather than the interference pattern being created by two slits? It seems to me just logically, rationally sensible to say, if one of these two experiments is supposed to be considered meaningful or to have impact, it would be the single slit experiment creating interference with one photon. That's the one you have to explain. And apparently they just ignored it, pretended it didn't exist, and then said, oh, look how surprising this effect is, as if it was a new effect, that we'd never seen it before. Physics has never seen this interference pattern before, when Newton saw it. I mean, you gotta call bullshit when it's time to call bullshit, and that's just fucking bullshit. To say Young means something in the context of the pre-existing experiments by Newton is just kind of overtly silly. What could the two-slit experiment possibly add that isn't already something you could prove with the single slit? If there's a real phenomenon there, again, the more dramatic presentation of it is when there's only one opening and you end up with an interference pattern, for fuck's sake. Okay. Right, now I was going to make another point and I forgot it. Damn. You know, that's like in that vein where just by looking at what they're doing, you can see the chicanery. Okay, this is it. So they're always playing with the width of the slits, right? So if somebody wants to make an argument, they just manipulate how wide the slit is to say, look how nothing that pattern is, or look how something the pattern is. So if you want the pattern, you can change how the pattern looks by just making the slit wider. So if you want the most bars in your pattern, you ideally want to have like a pretty wide opening, like a millimeter or half a millimeter, you know, something you could see the size of that opening. Because that'll get you the biggest spread of bars that are still visible. That is enough light where you can see them in a single slit. But if you want to make the single slit look completely uninteresting, then make the slit really, really small, because then the central maxima will dominate and everything else will just disappear. And you'll end up with just this one big hump with little tiny humps, and the single slit experiment becomes totally uninteresting. So it's only so if the aperture is too small, the pattern goes away. The aperture is too big, the pattern goes away. And that's a key thing not stated, is that the pattern has a location that is not, it's not at it's in some middle ground. not the middle, but I'm just saying it's in a middle ground where too small an opening destroys it and too big an opening destroys it. Too big because too much light gets through and it just annihilates everything. Because the pattern's too subtle compared to the volume of light going through the center maxima. The center maxima becomes so dominant, nothing else can be seen as a percentage of the photons. And if you do the opposite, and make the slit too small, you're just getting too few photons. So unless you're willing to use photographic paper or something, making the slit really small isn't going to work with a laser beam, because you have to build up the pattern because so few photons are getting through the slits. I think that's one way of saying that. The other way to say that is that you have to move the target closer because your pattern is spreading out so far. That's another problem. You're at the same 10 meters away, you're going to end up with a pattern that might be 15 or 20 meters across, kind of a thing. The diffraction is so wide. So you have to have some way of narrowing that pattern to see it. So you'd have to bring the target twice as close or something. But these are the manipulations. I'm just saying, so it's clearly lots of room to manipulate what is visually seen, and then describing that as the function of the thing, and these are all just distortions used for purposes to manipulate people's perception of what the reality is. But the reality is both the single slit can create a very rich pattern, with the only liability that, yes, the central maxima will be much brighter, but that's the only liability. Otherwise, it's the same pattern. All right. Yeah, close enough. Can't stay up later. Yeah, okay, whatever. So some guy telling me he can't stay up. Oh, okay, good. Sorry, don't. I don't blame you. I can't stay up either. But this is timing. This is I don't really, being completely free in terms of my time is a little difficult during the day. All right, so this guy said, mindless marbles. If applied, okay, so I said if applied in the two-slit experiment, it would become the four-slit experiment, not a correct prediction. All right, so he says, for the simplified version of the double slit that's always presented, okay, so that's right there, we got a problem, right? Because these are physicists. So I'm just saying I'm talking about physics lectures, okay? I'm talking about Feynman, Walter Lewin, I can't remember this guy's name at Yale. These are real big money physicists. So I'm just saying, if they're presenting some fake version, okay, that's kind of bogus, isn't it? If they're teaching physics with some version that's simplified that they aren't claiming it's simplified. Anyway, people draw the old on-off pattern, but that's not actually right. The real pattern has envelope humps with more humps inside of them. Yes, that's the real pattern in the double slit, and that's what I've pointed out. And what I've also pointed out is I haven't seen somebody derive the math for that. So I'm not saying they can't create a mathematical formula that can produce that result, but I just haven't seen it to analyze how they're doing it, because maybe they're using another gimmick. I mean, it's a simple enough pattern where it doesn't take much of a mathematical trick to create on and off, right? I mean, you just do like a 1/2 thingy, recycled by a half second, right? So you just do a half a time interval and a half cycle, and you can create this on-off thing, right? So it's a simple, like you can create on-off with just two fractions in an equation. So I'm just saying it's pretty easy to make these kind of manipulations in equations, and that's what I'm saying you have to sort of be aware of. And if you look at the math they use for the double slit experiment versus the math for the single slit, you'll see that the only difference is their injection of the Huygens second photon. All right, which is at the width of the slit. So I'm just saying, so they establish the width of the slit as being the distance between the two photons, as if there were two when there was only one. But I'm just saying that's how they do the conversion from one photon to two photons. All right. When you apply Huygens to a double slit, this actually is what you derive. I don't think the prediction is off. Okay, so you're saying it isn't. You're saying it's what you actually derive. So I'm just saying I haven't seen that. So you want to give me a link or something to demonstrate that, fine, but I haven't seen that. Also, I wanted to say that there is an equation, c squared. Well, see, as soon as it gets into the c thing, right? Because this got into the whole, when they stood doing the math for the refractive index, and that's whatever the guy's name is, some S name, another Dutch guy. But anyway, and they start, even Newton was talking about the velocity of light and as a variable. And, I think it's stupid to consider the velocity of light as anything but a constant. It doesn't vary. So if it's in any equation, it has to be understood that it can't be variable. Okay, so you're stuck with it. So I don't know, this says something, I guess that's theta squared y, theta times t squared equals c squared theta squared y divided by theta x squared. So that's getting into two velocities. So that's my whole argument. So the y and the x there's no x in one side of the equation, so they've converted one into time. It's kind of doing this, the geometry of velocity, which is a component in one direction and a component in another direction. And that's what was so irritating almost about watching these calculations of diffraction angles in the context of, because I sort of wanted to get to this, because it's related, from another guy's comment about the lensing argument. The whole idea of light being bent by gravity. So there's two ways for something to move in space, right? You can, if I have a spaceship and it's moving this way, I could hit it, and it doesn't mean, and so now it's got a component going this way. So it's got a component going this way, and it's got a component going that way. And the two of them will add up to look like this, and well, this. But we know that it's a component. We know that what it's really doing is moving in some sort of other kind of way. Part of it's doing one thing, and then part of it's doing another thing. And those two things are adding up to what we see as a diagonal. But it's not really what the forces are, because the forces always stay kind of independent. That's the superposition argument, kind of, in the sense that, so they use superposition for different things, but I mean, that's sort of the superposition argument, is that the forces don't mix. And that may be also true for things like velocity, that it's not mixed, that they're still independent velocities in directions, and that their mixture only looks like a mixture when you see something moving, but the actual stuff inside of it is doing the pretty directly going this way and going this way. The components are still extractable as x and y forces. So how would that work with light? So if you're going to say you could bend light, you'd have to then say that light could have multi-dimensional velocity. And see, that's where my theory, I would argue that would be impossible, because light is, the whole idea of light having mass in one dimension is the idea that it only has mass in the dimension it's heading in. It only has mass forward. It doesn't have mass in any other direction. So light can't do this. It can't have two velocities. And that's what they sort of try to give it. And that, so in the lensing argument, you could almost argue that if you, so in one circumstance, they're saying light has this ability to absorb multi-dimensional velocities. So what would be the implications in the gravity argument would be is that you're not really changing this, you're not making a change in its vector. You're by bending it. Okay, because if it had both components still, how to best put that? Its exit velocity would still be the speed of light. So yeah, but see, it's like, because material objects are in 3 dimensions, so they can change their gyroscope, so to speak. But light couldn't do that. So in a sense, what you would say is what gravity would be doing, it would be taking something moving this way and just move it sideways. It wouldn't be able to change the angle of it. It would just be able to move its position this way. So that wouldn't be theoretically bending light. It would just be moving it to a new position where it's still going straight. So it's not an angle change. Because we know the electrons do the angle change. All right, so that's a really complex, well, it's not really complex, but it's complicated to explain. So I probably didn't do that very well. But there's a big difference between going this way and being pushed this way. So having wind blow you this way as you're sailing this way, and actually a change in direction. 2 different things, especially in a world where you have, like I said, that where things can exist in 1 dimension, which light exists in 1 dimension. All right. So next comment here. Well, I'll see if there's any other comments posted by people. I assume they're people. Where the hell is the room? Huh. I know it's one of these. Okay. Let's see. You're missing the point of the paraelectric functions of GOHANS. I don't know what that is, but who cares? Quantum paraelectric. There's no paraelectric, whatever the hell that is. Explanations are critical for your theory. Well, they're really not. Electric isn't even a real phenomenon. Electric is just a form of magnetism. I mean, electric isn't really a thing. Okay, it's a consequence. How better to put that? It's almost like the difference between light and a laser beam. So it's like, it's the same thing. And it's like magnetism is like light, and electricity is like the laser beam of light. The laser beam of magnetism, sorry. It's just the force being confined to a conductor. Mostly. Anyway, all right, I'll move on. Oh, here he says something else. No. You're missing the point. Well, fuck you. Your theory has huge gaps. No, it doesn't. In quantitative data. Well, explain that in its magnetism explanation. Well, it doesn't. So, fuck you. There's no gaps, especially in the magnetism part. Let's see. Magnogravitics, whatever. Look, I don't know what religion are you arguing for, because you're not even using words that have anything to do with physics. So whatever your pseudoscience is, you'd have to first out yourself as whatever you are, an electric universe guy or a Tesla guy or Bertram Russell guy or whatever the fuck it is, whatever the wacky dinosaur that you're pretending to ride. So anyway, I'll find that ignorable and move on. Whatever. It's not an homonym. I'm saying that there's no point in you throwing your religious jargon at me Mohammed says, well, I don't care what Mohammed says. Prove to me that Mohammed is relevant first. You know, using special little whatever jihad words, you know, your special little language, it doesn't mean anything to rational people. You can't just make up words. I can make up words. You know, I can just say, you know, the Tinkerbellatons. I mean, I could say Tinkerbellatons, and oh yeah, maybe me and my club of people who believe in Tinkerbellatons, you know what that means. But I'm rational enough to know if I went on the street and started telling people, "Don't you see the Tinkerbellatons? Don't you get it? They're fundamental." That yeah, I would just look like a fucking kook. So sorry, uh, but you know, crazy person heal thyself. Yeah, I don't know what a pish is, so I need to know a school of pish. What the fuck is pish? Pish. Pish. Phish. I'm supposed to know what the fuck that is. Sorry. Doesn't work for me as a word. Anyway. Waste of time, distraction, I believe. All right, back to the comments. So I think I finished this. Let's see, what do you say here? Okay. Oh, okay. Oh, there's more stuff here. Wavefronts have a structure. Okay. Huygens concept proposes that the wavefront resolves or is constructed from pre-existing. Wait a minute. This is a different message, I think. Oh, okay. I hadn't finished the other guy yet. All right. So C, blah, blah, blah. It actually describes pure waves using calculus. It'd be interesting to see whether simulations of the equation give the same results. Yeah, well, I'm just saying anything that's time variable is really messy. So I don't know what the t squared represents, but that's just going to, I think, fuck the game. But whatever. I don't do calculus, so I can't say for sure. So you'd have to point to a link of somebody doing the math for me to comment on the math. I propose that the Huygens concept is invalid in its mechanism. This is DB. Although the end result is the same. So he's basically saying, yes, right answer, wrong reason. The Huygens concept proposes that the wavefront resolves or is constructed from pre-existing multi-point spherical wavefronts. Well, pre-existing would not be correct. So they're not constructed from pre-existing. They are constantly forming. Let's see how else to say that. Yeah, there's just no way. There's no good way to say that because it's every. I mean, the wave moves. So first you have to say, okay, can you create a wave that doesn't? So if you create a pure wave in the sense that you hit, say if you could hit water and there was no rebound. So all you got was the one wave. So no rebound waves to confuse things. So you have one wave front, just one solid wave front. Now the argument is in Huygens is that that wave front is constantly creating little waves ahead of it that are creating the next wave front. Like I said, I can't even describe it because it doesn't make any sense. You know, I mean, Huygens is nonsense, so you can't make it make any sense because it's bullshit. Anyway, I propose that the wavefronts have a structure set by mutual separation of components. In this case, quanta. Well, I would argue that waves form in media because mediums have tension. So you can only create a wave in something that's tense, something that has rigidity or that has the ability to, there has to have there has to be a tightness between the molecules. You can't create a wave in sand, let's say. So there has to be an adhesion. There has to be adhesion to have a wave travel. And so it's completely a medium dependent function. You can't have a wave without a medium. So it's perfectly valid. I mean, I hate the Ken guy. He's an idiot. But it's perfectly valid to say a wave in what? I mean, a magnetic field and an electric field. Okay, fields made of what? Okay, fields that don't have, that even when nothing exists in them, they somehow are present, apparently. I mean, it just doesn't mean anything. How can the field, if you're going to give the field structure that can be distorted, that's just like bent space again. So you're just saying that it's the bent electric field and the bent, you're creating a medium. You're creating ether, for fuck's sake. All right, anyway. I propose the wavefronts have a structure set by mutual separation of components, most likely by repulsion considering the increased radial speed. Well, again, it can't be. Obviously, it's adhesion. It's not, an obnoxious force, but it really doesn't matter. The point is the whole thing is under pressure, and it's the pressure that creates tension, and it's the tension that makes everything communicate with everything else. Everything is force. It's the tension between magnets. I vibrate one magnet, it vibrates the other magnets. This tension between these magnets right here, this tension that doesn't allow this magnet to get close to this other magnet. This tension is creating this. That's what creates the wave, is the tension. It's communicated through the tension. The things themselves can move very little. A little tiny movement here, and it will be transmitted. A little tiny movement here, a little tiny movement, and it's moving through the tension of the field strength between them, the magnetic bond. And yeah, it can be repulsive, but it can only be repulsive in the context of an overall system that's attractive. So it's like it has to first create the external pressure to create an internal repulsion to combat it. But the point is both of those would be tension, and that's what you need. All right, anyway. Most likely repulsion considered the increased radial speed. So I don't know what you mean by, radial spread. I think the spread just has to do with the inverse square kind of stuff. The multiple point wavefronts of Huygens are not allowed to occur in this structure. Sorry, I don't know what that means. If that surrounding constraint is removed, a single point of a wavefront is released to commence its own radial or spherical spread, which is itself constrained by the same structure. Well, obviously, there's got to be some point of momentum here. So if a tiny wavelet, like there's an infinite number of wavelets, and I all of a sudden say, all right, wavelet 1,473,000, okay, is now free. How could that wavelet have anything but 1/1,000,000th of the power of the original wave? So somewhere in here, somebody has to get rational and say, well, obviously the entire all the mass that has been moved in the transmission of the wave can't possibly be funneled into that one single wavelet. So it just creates a problem of as a practical argument. Yeah, this is all fine if you don't need to come up with energy to maintain the wave's propagation, but we know in most mediums you do. Obviously, light is a different kind of phenomenon. If you can make one photon clone into multiple photons, well, okay, yeah, the photons still have to be photons because they're quantized, but clearly nobody, I mean, if you wouldn't trick Einstein with that. I mean, Einstein's not going to believe you can make two photons out of one photon. So he's going to obviously argue that breaks conservation rules. Passage through a slit removes lateral constraint and allows one or more, depending on the width of the slit, new spherical waveforms to form. Well, again, it's not one or more. It's completely dependent on the surfaces. So whatever the obstruction is will dictate the creation of the new wavefront. So the new wavefronts will be created wherever there is something that impedes the progress of the wave. Yeah. But that's how it works in physical waves, right? Is that friction is what, it's the adhesion of the water, right? The water molecules adhesion to each other, and then those molecules that are closest to the surface in water end up sticking to the surface, so there's drag, and that's what creates the new waves, right? The new bulging waves that come out of the double slit in a water wave situation are created because there's adhesion, and the water doesn't travel as fast on the outside as it does in the middle. So the maths of Huygens prevails. Well, it says you, I just don't think so. But anyway, as for the screen pattern in the experiments, I agree with Emendum regarding the complexity of the interactions between the photons and the slit material. Maybe a separate comment. I don't know. Well, maybe, but regardless. Okay, so Hoffladay's comment, which I found irritating. Because Huygens is to do with waves doesn't make it quantum. Well, I would argue that quantum mechanics is entirely made out of creating a wave function. That's quantum mechanics. My argument is that quantum electrodynamics, the original quantum mechanics, had nothing to do with assigning photons a wave function. It just had to do with the idea that photons have a frequency and they travel in a straight line, and when they interact with electrons, they cause it to accelerate, and there's a change in momentum. There's a change in vector, if the movement of the electron and the release of the photon will be at different vectors than what went in to the experiment. So the only thing, the same amount of energy comes out, it's just that it changes in the sense that the photon changes the direction of the electron and the electron changes the direction of the photon. That was quantum electrodynamics, and that had nothing to do with waves. All right, anyway. Doesn't make it quantum. Maxwell's equations are all about the waves. Well, no, they're not. So you show me that. Maxwell's equations are all about straight line force. So I'd almost argue it's exactly the opposite of waves. Maxwell's equations are basically gravitational equations applied to magnetism and electricity. And you know, the whole point of Maxwell's equations were that it was through Maxwell's equations that there was realized that the speed of force is the same as the speed of light, that light is moving as fast as the force is. So you could just say the speed of force instead of the speed of light, and that would be correct. And it was Maxwell waving on it, okay, because of his own preference in terms of a theory. But the equation doesn't have a wave in it, it has frequency in it. So it's to say it's all about waves when it's all about Maxwell's, all of his equations are basically pointing out that there's vectors, straight line vectors of force. And they do the divergent thing, just like gravity. They're straight line vectors and they diverge. I mean, fuck, that's not waves, but it is a classical theory. Again, Maxwell's equations aren't a theory. You won't find any documentary claiming a quantum description of the single slit using Huygens. I can't believe he's even said that. I can't find anything other than a description using Huygens to do single slit math. I can't find a single one that doesn't use Huygens. You won't find any documentary claiming a quantum description of single slit using Huygens. I don't understand how you could. The fundamental argument of the interference pattern is quantum mechanics, for fuck's sake. The idea that there's no real position, that it's a wave of probability, that's all dependent on there being a photon interfering with itself. Again, you don't even get the argument. The argument is the very idea of a photon interfering with itself is idiotic, that this has nothing to do with the space between the slits and the target, and has everything to do with where the photon travels through the slit. And if it goes through the middle of the slit or it goes through the very edge of the slit, it's going to decide which way it goes. And it has nothing to do with any fucking interference fucking pattern. Wave interference. All right, it is, okay, so I do it's the same pattern. Then the guy posts the Wikipedia, I believe it's Wikipedia, description of the Huygens principle, which is, yeah, it's Wikipedia, Huygens for now. So maybe they rewrote it for this purpose, but I'm just saying the classic Huygens. I mean, maybe this is the technical description of it. I'm just saying it's just so convoluted. Huygens principle can be seen as a consequence of the homogeneity of space, which right there, what does that mean? The space is uniform in all locations. Well, great. The empty bag is empty in all locations. Any disturbance created in a significantly small region of homogeneous space. Now light is a disturbance, so we don't even get to think of it as a thing. It's somehow a disturbance in a puddle, or in a homogeneous medium, propagates from that region in all geodesic directions. The waves created by this disturbance in turn create disturbances in other regions. Now that doesn't make any sense, right? So if the wave is going out, if I put a drop of rock in a puddle of water, it doesn't cause disturbances in other regions. It causes disturbance in very specific locations as the wave propagates. So the way they said this is just so bad. I mean, it creates disturbances in other regions and so on. So by that, this guy's telling me, the Alexander Zappa guy, is telling me that that statement means the wave propagates in a forward direction, spreading forward, and that it disturbs the regions ahead of it. Well, that's for sure. I'm just saying I can't make much sense out of that. Create disturbance in other regions and so on. That the wave causes the wave to wave the next wave, and then that next wave waves the next wave, and then it waves the next wave's wave. I mean, it's silly. The superposition of all the waves. Okay, so now we're back to the tiny little waves. But we know they make just the next wave front. They don't make new waves that go forever. They make new waves that create a wave front, and that new wave front Huygens is. All right, the superposition of all the waves result in the observed pattern of wave propagation. So again, it just really doesn't make any sense. If you're going to argue that, say if the rings are coming off of it going this way. So there's a little ring here, and the next wave, the next wave, the next wave. This is almost arguing that Huygens is here at the very start. So the first little wave when I make, there's an infinite number of little Huygens waves, and they just keep going out. And that they Huygens at the same wavelength as the original wave. That doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, none of this makes any sense. So what it's really, though, what I think it's really saying is that it's a point source. So it's back to the slit thing, or it's back to a puddle. I throw a rock in a puddle, and let's pretend there's no, like again, no rebound waves because of the water. So you just have the one wave front. And I put an obstruction. The point is now when the wave hits the obstruction, is that the little Huygens-y things allow it to create two new waves on either side of the thing, because the mini waves will be free to become independent waves, because now they're separated from their original wave front, sort of. All right, anyway. All right, so I don't know. So I don't know if this is even worth reading. It's so incomprehensibly stupid. All right, other regions. So, I mean, look, the waves created by this disturbance in turn create disturbances in other regions and so on. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense at all. Homogeneity of space. So again, what is this even implying? The nothing is evenly nothing, but it can be disturbed. So I can disturb the nothing. I hate you. And then nothing gets disturbed. What is it? Just doesn't mean anything. This is just such fucking religion. Is fundamental to quantum field theory. Well, so whatever that is. Again, so first, they haven't even got this thing called a bag, of quantum mechanics. There's no box you could buy, and you open the box of quantum mechanics and there's this nice ordered packaging that you pull out things and it makes sense. There's nothing like that. And quantum field theory, there's no such thing. There's no package called quantum field theory. No. Where the wave function of any object propagates along all available unobstructed paths. Again, so obviously, well, we already know that, right? So who would think waves just stop for no reason? I mean, where the wave function of any object, whatever an object is, so how do you make any sense out of this? The wave function of the object, so the thing traveling at a frequency, okay. I don't know. Propagates along all available unobstructed paths. Yes, the wave moves forward because it has velocity. There's a velocity, and the mass that has been created has the same velocity, so it just keeps moving because it has the same velocity. There's a bulge, and the whole bulge has velocity. I mean, it's not much different than me cutting my hand off and throwing it. It's, it's got velocity now. There's more hand flying that way. As you could call it a wave of hand moving across the medium. It's a bulge of hand because that whole bulge has velocity. And waves move because it's a mass that moves. It's a mass that has velocity. There's actual atoms that have velocity. They move across the surface of the water. Anyway, when integrated along all possible paths, okay, here we go, with all possible paths. So again, that gets you into trouble because we know there isn't all possible paths. We know that they can only move perpendicular to that wavefront. With a phase factor, I mean, if they did something different, you couldn't even do the single slit math with Huygens. With a phase factor proportional to the action. So what does that even mean? A phase factor proportional to the action. All the wave has to be in one phase until you break it and slow it down somehow. And right, water waves do that. Water waves are slowed down by the tension with the surfaces, and that's how their phase gets broken. But light isn't going to do that. Light doesn't have friction. The interference of the wave functions correctly predicts observable phenomena, says you. Well, says them. So let me just say that again. The interference of the wave functions correctly predicts observable phenomena. I mean, I don't know who wrote this, but they really are so full of shit. Yeah, I mean, that's just an assertion with no evidence. And it doesn't even explain anything. The interference of the wave functions. Oh, again, the out of phase waves. So the flat waves go in, somehow they turn into bulged waves, even though there's no friction with light. So even though light doesn't have friction with surfaces, somehow it comes out in a bulged wave. It came in flat, comes out bulged. Every point on the wavefront acts as a source of secondary wavelets that spread out in the light cone. Okay, so again, so now it's been coned. So we coned the light because somehow the light had friction with the surfaces it went through. That's what you're supposed to believe. With the same speed as the wave. So anyway, so yeah, so you're just taking something flat, okay, where the lines would all be straight, and you're bending it. So now all the lines are radial. And light just automatically somehow gets bent when it goes through an opening with the magic Tinkerbell Compton factor. Anyway, every point on the wavefront acts as a source of secondary wavelets that spread out in a light cone with the same speed as the wave. The new wavefront is found by constructing the surface tangent to the secondary wavelets. They probably should say perpendicular, right? I mean, Hofstadter would tell us you can't say tangent. Yeah, that's it. That's not the right word. Tangent to the secondary wavelets. Yeah, well, I'm not going to be able to make anything out of that. I mean, the presumption that it's bulged for no reason, and then they're taking the tangents of the bulges to do where the photon goes. I don't know. I don't think that's how it works, but obviously get to know that sine theta crap. Anyway, all right, so he says the wave propagates by reclusive method of adding up waves spawned from the wavefront due to homogeneity of space. Well, what it's also saying, though, is there's so many of these little waves that you can't tell that there's separation between them. So the little waves are so multiple, so many of them, that you don't see the dent spaces, you know, so all you have is this solid front, which is also a crock of shit. I guess Huth wants you to deal with that instead of Huygens. Well, again, I don't. The point is, me bringing up Huygens, is that Huygens is always used to do single slit diffraction math because it's the only way to make the second photon. All right, but I think it's the same idea really, though this one is attributed to premises accepted by QM. Well, again, whatever is accepted is their business, but I'm just saying that none of this doesn't really have anything to do with the point. The point is that Huygens is a contrived thing. It doesn't have there's no evidence that this is how waves move. There's certainly no evidence of it in any fluid wave. Obviously, there's no evidence of it in any kind of electromagnetic wave because none of those have any evidence of them existing in the first place. Those waves, we don't even have evidence that they exist, period, hard evidence. So how the fuck could we ever speculate on them creating Huygens waves in front of them in the non-medium? Or again, you people are basically all just ether theorists. So it is kind of funny that the silly Tesla kooks think your people are sucky because you have too many particles in your theory, and you're basically just admitting that no, we're totally good with this ether thing, and that the photon is just vibrating or perturbating an ether field of magnet and electric, even though a photon has never been seen to produce any EMF ever in the history of mankind unless it hits an electron and makes it do it. Because photons aren't electromagnetic. They're not fucking wavy things. Okay, they're, as Einstein described, ton kind of things. Damn. Just keep having to do this over and over. Oh, sorry, I didn't look at the comments for a while. Sorry. No offense. Oh, good. Nobody said anything. Let's see. Amend him. He's such an ego whore. Whatever. Anyone else agree? Who cares? I mean, let's say I was the most egomaniacal motherfucker that ever existed, the most vain, disgusting. I actually do believe, yes, apparently I'm smarter than everybody because I figured out really complicated things like bad feelings are bad. I figured that out. Really bad. That means like they're actually bad to have in the universe. It's bad to have bad feelings, okay, that don't need to exist. So unless the bad feeling actually produces some kind of gold or something, the bad feeling shouldn't happen. So I was smart enough to figure that out. Yeah, I was smart enough to figure out that evolution doesn't have a brain. And then I was capable of unifying physics. So apparently I'm smarter than all you motherfuckers, because you can't do anything sensible. So yeah, in that sense, yeah. But it's not really a good contest to win. You know what I'm saying? I'm saying, okay, yeah. All right, I wouldn't like the gold medal of smart, but it's the special fucking Olympics. I mean, you people aren't just stupid. You're motherfucking stupid. Anyway. So, morbid atheist Yo. Well, that's not terribly helpful. Yeah, this is a little brief conversation between Forever Wolf Films. Hey, Morbid. And then he asked, how's it going? She didn't answer him yet, though. Maybe she did in a PM or something. Amendum whore. He's such an ego whore. Yes, whatever. Anyone else agree? Well, fuck you, Jacob. I mean, you're really off subject. I mean, really, you just can't get more like not on the subject. Well, I'll let you live a little longer to see if you have any hope at all of being a grown-up and trying to actually make an argument. But again, what's the difference? Let's say I was a convicted, you know, and I served 10 years in jail for child molestation. What the fuck would that have to do with any of this? Does it have something to do with the fucking argument? Does it have something to do with whether Huygens is bullshit? No, it doesn't, jackass. I mean, I spent this, like, what, 97% of this video I have spent arguing this complex structural mechanics stuff. What in that has something to do with my fucking ego, you fucking cunt? I'm just so sick of these raggy, stupid, ignorant, motherfucking pussy insults from you little ragged pieces of shit that produce nothing. You can't, you know, you don't even have the balls to man up and make a video explaining what you think the truth is so I can rip it a new asshole. Cunts. All right, what a fail in getting no one to agree, Jacob. Yeah, well, there's no one in the room barely, so I mean, asking this room, anybody agree? I mean, it's just not really a very productive thing to do. I mean, by those standards, I fail every time I communicate with the listeners because obviously there aren't many. But regardless, that's another separate subject. So what else? There was one other thing I wanted to get into. Oh, I think I did the comments, right? I think I got the most relevant ones. I mean, me and the Zapta guy went to a whole bunch of little back and forthies about what these sentences mean. And I've read it, right? You've heard some of it. You can go read it. The definition of what Huygens is so convoluted that, yeah, it's hard to make any sense out of it. I mean, I just still am stunned by that one line in there. You know, where I just can't follow it. I can't find anything of substance in there. Let's see. C. Huygens, so now he's telling me. C. Huygens principle secondary wavelets. All right, I know this secondary wavelet shit, so I don't see any point in this. This is the second time I write this. I had the text re-upping to quotes, but kind of lost them. I did question my interpretation. I stumbled. Oh, let's see. Upon a lot of videos that only show the secondary wavelets when a wave collides with matter. That's right. The choice. Well, see, look, in the first place, there's no relevance. I mean, I don't really want to argue with you. I don't know why you're being such an asshole, but I mean, whatever. There would be no point. Huygens wouldn't have any relevance if we just talked about, well, there's empty space. I disturbed it. I made a wave, and the wave never hits anything. We have nothing to talk about, right? It can't possibly be meaningful because there's no physics happening. There's just Huygens happening. It doesn't mean anything. It's invisible. It's meaningless. So it's only meaningful until it hits something, and that's the whole point here. And when it hits something, what happens? And the argument is that when it hits something, it creates new waves. That's the whole fucking point. That's the single slit turns one photon into two photons by Huygensing. Whatever. I can keep saying that, and you're just going to keep saying, I don't get it. Whatever. All right, anyway. Let's see. The choice of representation on the part of the people may have misguided you to think that waves only do the second wavelets then. Well, again, you keep using words that just really piss me off. Misguided me? I'm sorry. These are physics professors, for fuck's sake. So it's not me being misguided. Why don't you just point your finger at them then? Why don't you play their video and quote from their own words and say how they're wrong, instead of sitting there telling me I'm wrong because I listened to what they said Huygens is. Anyway, I stumbled upon a lot of videos that only show the second wavelets when the wave collides with matter. This choice of representation on the part of people may have misguided you to think the waves only do the second wavelets then. No, it doesn't matter that they're doing it in fucking empty space, for fuck's sake. What the fuck does it matter that this wave is created by a bunch of little tiny waves around it create this second wave? How could that possibly be relevant if it hits nothing ever? Oh, that's right. It couldn't possibly mean anything. Who cares? It can't mean anything. It can't mean anything how the wave moves. If my theory is correct that the wave moves because it has mass, and the mass has velocity, and the mass is just moving because the mass has velocity, okay? Well, or it's Huygensing. What's the difference if it never hits anything? The whole point is what happens by my mechanical theory that the wave is actual matter, and the actual matter has velocity and it's moving, okay? The moving mass is moving. Okay, an extra mass volume of atoms are actually have velocity and actually moving, versus this Huygens crap, okay, where the mass is somehow creating little baby waves that go out and then decide where the next wave front should be. The only way we could know the difference is it has to hit fucking something. The two theories can't be identified as different until it hits something. Fucker. Anyway, this video shows the interpretation I described. My description is consistent with many facts, such as the infinity thing. Well, you say infinity is a fact. Okay, you say an infinite number of something inside a confined space is possible. Well, I say that's a crock of fucking shit that you'll never prove, fuckhead. Yeah. All right. Also remember that the two waves Huygens was a shortcut to not calculate all the integral. Well, again, I'm saying that when they do calculate, they can't calculate it, because if you have an infinite space between these things, then there's no sine theta. you can't have anything but parallel lines because the two lines are on top of each other. So you can't ever create any divergence. So you don't have any fucking goddamn phase change. For fuck's sake. Of the infinite amount of waves. Question mark. I don't know that. I didn't see that as a question. You once knew this. I did. That they all canceled out. Yeah, exactly. They canceled out because they didn't have sufficient relevance. And so you only have to calculate using two waves. No, you conveniently are left with two waves somehow separated by the entire distance of the two objects. So isn't that convenient? All these shortcuts of the description I know I'm trying to show you. All these are shortcuts to the description I now am trying to show you. Well, whatever you say, there's a better way to do this. I'm saying show me. That's right, because I don't buy it. So I don't see any link here. So I guess it's in the spam folder, but I don't know. I don't see anything. They say wave propagates by constant wavelet production at the boundary, creating a new boundary. I am really certain of this. I'm not doubting that. So again, why the fuck do you keep pointing out like I don't understand that the new boundary is created? The point is what happens when it hits a surface? Fuck. An object. Damn. Anyway, it's just hopeless. Hopeless. Again, it has no rational foundation. There's no evidence that anything on Earth creates an infinite number of little waves in front of it. None. That's the starting point to this conversation in this whole big pile of butthole. But I mean, you know, again, this is just like catch-22 religion. Well, the catch-22 is if you do this, this, and this to Huygens, you can make it work. Yeah, well, you could probably make anything work by that description. All right, anyway. All right, so the last thing I wanted to comment on, I think, if I'm going to comment on something else. Well, some guy brought up galaxies again, and that's another one. Just so, these people are just so irritating. They just don't get it. But galaxies obviously, in my opinion, just like hugely obviously, can't have very massive centers. If they had very massive centers, galaxies couldn't function. They couldn't do what they're doing. And that's just the law of, that's like Newton's laws. These are really solid laws. You know, that your I guess I could draw the arrow as a velocity. Yeah. All right. So what gravity is saying, okay, is if you're going to stay in an orbit, the only way you can do it if you're close to the sun is you got to have a very high velocity, so a very long arrow to stay in this high gravity. Because if you don't have a long velocity arrow, you go right into the sun. Hey, I froze. And if you're far away, then you can have a much slower velocity arrow, little tiny arrow, and you're okay. All right. So you need a big ton of velocity close, and you don't need hardly any velocity far away. Now, obviously, a galaxy, okay, has got all these little spiral arms, and you know they just reek. Okay, so this is a huge difference between a solar system. So let me draw the solar system real quick. Little plant here, little plant there, plant there, plant there, plant there, plant there. All right, so a solar system is this little sparsely, okay, 99.99999999999% of the mass of the solar system is here in the sun, and these are just tiny little specks of stuff. And I didn't even draw this very well because we know they're not balanced. There's usually more dots on one side than there is the other side. So there's, you know, at any one time, there's like 7 plants on one side and 3 plants on the other, that kind of thing. No, I'm not really in the picture here, am I, entirely? So a solar system can be very uneven. clearly a galaxy is completely balanced, but more clearly, these radial arms don't have anything near this huge velocity difference. I mean, the velocity difference between Mercury, an atom close to the sun, and an atom far away from the sun, the velocity difference is huge. And obviously, the stuff here and the stuff here don't have a huge velocity difference. They're pretty much almost moving the same speed in terms of the I mean, obviously, the further out you are, the faster you're going. So that's the irony, right? There's more velocity out here in the sense that they're going much more distance. This is only going a little tiny bit of distance. No, well, that means, yeah. So that would be, this would be the slowest one, because yeah, this is going really slow by comparison to the outside. So it's completely the opposite of this. So it's completely the opposite of something that has a heavy mass in the center. I mean, theoretically, this should go around, this part of the galaxy should go around like 400 times for every time this one goes around once. So they're just completely not connected. So the real point is that in galaxies, it seems to me clear that the bulk of the mass is in these arms, and that the suns actually, little suns here, that they're actually moving faster towards the arm than they are moving towards the center. So they're more gravitationally being pulled towards the arms than they are being pulled towards the center. All right. So enough of that one. The one I wanted to get to was somewhat, it's related to gravity somewhere. Oh yeah, this one's kind of a big one. All right. So I was thinking about electrons and protons, and I was thinking there's no way to really detect how influenced by gravity they are, because there's no way to put them in a field that isn't covered in charge, in the sense that there's an like obviously if I took an electron and put it above my desk, the huge number of electrons on my desk are going to decide where the electron goes, and it's probably not going to go to my desk. Well, it might go to the protons. If I can scrape off all the surface electrons, then it might go to my desk. But it won't be gravity that moves the electron. It's going to be magnetism. Okay, it's going to go where it's going to go to an electrically neutral place. It's not going to go to a place where gravity is going to push it. So I don't know if there's any experiment they could actually do where they could see an electron being pulled in by gravity and not being pulled in by protons or some charge element. And the same thing goes with the proton, right? Because it's charged. You can't really separate it from environments that are charged, and so it's really hard to tell whether it's actually affected by gravity. So I was thinking that the thing left over is the neutron, and that neutrons might be the only thing that give matter their gravitational mass. That mass is really just a reflection of how many neutrons you have. That neutrons are the only thing being affected by gravity, and that electrons and protons are using a force that's in the field, like gravity. It's the polarization argument. So it's almost like you could argue that it's red, green, blue. It's three polarizations. And the neutrons are doing the gravity thing. The protons and the electrons are doing the magnetic thing and the charge thing. Or you could say the protons are doing the charge thing, you could say the electrons are doing the magnetic thing, or vice versa, but it doesn't really matter. But anyway, I'm going to explore that, because that it makes sense to say that these are the filters for the three polarizations, the three-dimensional polarizations, which is the real point of a lot of this stuff, is that you have three dimensions, forward, this way, and this way. And that these dimensions have a catch to them, in the sense that two of them are similar and one of them is always dissimilar. Similar in the sense of they're on the same plane. So it's like these two dimensions, this way and this way, are on the same plane, and this one's the one off the plane. And it's always like that. No matter how you turn it, that there's two on the same plane and one of them off the plane. Right. So the proton and the electron would be on the same plane, and the neutron is the one off the plane doing the gravity thing. Well, anyway, I need to evolve it a hell of a lot more. But I was just thinking that maybe neutrons are the only thing giving things gravity, that something can't be affected by gravity if it doesn't have a neutron in it. And I don't know whether that's a theory I can prove or not. I mean, you have hydrogen isotopes, but again, they're so charged that how could you tell, whether they're being moved by gravity or being moved by charge? So I'll have to look into that. But anyway, that's for another day. So I think I've done enough for tonight anyway. But yeah, I'll make a video. I'll do another double slit and single slit video and try to compile some stuff maybe. Not tomorrow, but I guess I'll get to it. I mean, look, this is the foundation experiment. I thought I did a very good video. I pointed out how I can provide an explanation for why light diffracts going through closures. And it's a sensible explanation. The surface has electrons. Free electrons are on every surface, and they spread out as they go further away from the surface. There's less and less of them. And it just seems rational that they're going to line up because they don't like each other. So they always spread out and displace each other. They're what's the word for distributed? Their distance from each other is distributed across all of them because they're field pressure associated. So if two electrons are closer to each other in a field of 10, the rest of them will spread out, will go a little closer so those two can go further apart. They'll always do that. And the fact that they're doing that on the surface of anything that is opaque to light would mean that any surface like that would create a barrier of electrons that are going to not move straight and therefore diffract the light. Anyway, I've already been through it. But I think that's a reasonable explanation. That free electrons are vulnerable to being obliged to move in certain directions because of their association to each other. And that obligation, so it's like if an electrons are bound to each other in terms of a distance separation, there's a triangle of them and they're equal distant. The point would be is the electron will now have to move in between those two. So if I hit it with a photon going this way, it's going to tend to have to move this way, if you get me. And then when it releases a photon, it's going to release it in this forward direction rather than the original direction the photon arrived in. I think that's really solid. That's Feynman shit, for fuck's sake. Well, anyway. Enough for this video. I just got so much to do. I just can't see getting bogged down in this. But I mean, it's the foundational thing. Again, the physicists keep saying it. This is the double slit Young experiment. This is the foundation of quantum mechanics, blah, 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 blah. And I'm just saying that it's obviously a shitty foundation. It's like, look, it's like, keep going back to it too, but I'm just saying that, Einstein's theories are all dependent on this stupid claim that light is bent by gravity, and they still haven't proven that. Yet they claim it to be a fact. Anyway, enough. Till next time and such.